All right, let's dive into something pretty amazing. The preamble to the Indian Constitution. It's remarkable how this short paragraph basically sets the stage for everything that follows in creating modern India.
It really is like a blueprint, yeah. Outlining both the aspirations and the kind of society India wants to be. And it does all of that in just a few powerful lines.
It's got to be more than just a fancy intro, though, right? I mean, what makes a preamble such a big deal? Why are we even talking about this?
Well, think of it this way. It's like a declaration of intent. It lays out right at the start where the power for this whole document comes from, what kind of nation it's trying to create, and the values it's built on. Think of it as the DNA of modern India.
Okay, I see why we're taking a deep dive into this. So where do we even begin with something like this? It feels kind of daunting.
The best place to start, right at the beginning, of course. The preamble opens with those iconic words, "We the people of India."
Wow, powerful stuff. Simple, yet so profound, gives me chills just hearing it. But why is it so important?
Well, those three words are a very clear declaration that the Constitution's authority comes directly from the citizens. It establishes, right from the start, the democratic foundation of the Indian state. It's easy to forget the historical context. India had just emerged from colonial rule.
So after centuries under the British, this was India declaring, we are in control now.
Exactly. "We the people" was a bold statement. It was rejecting any external authority and placing power firmly in the hands of the Indian people.
So I can see how that would have been a truly, revolutionary concept at the time.
That's a defining moment, yeah. And it set the tone for everything that follows in the Constitution. Speaking of defining, right after those opening words, the preamble goes on to lay out the 5 defining characteristics of the Indian state. A sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. It's quite a mouthful, I know.
It really is. 5 big ideas all packed into one sentence. We've all heard these terms before, but let's break them down, In the context of the Indian Constitution, what does it really mean for India to be sovereign?
Sovereign means that India is an independent nation, completely free from any outside control or influence. It gets to make its own decisions on the world stage, charting its own course without being beholden to any other power.
Okay, so after centuries of colonial rule, this was a huge declaration of independence and self-determination. I mean, it's like finally being able to breathe freely after being held underwater for so long.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It captures the essence of what sovereignty meant for India. It was about reclaiming their destiny and shaping their own future.
Next on the list is socialist, which I know has been the subject of some debate, especially since it was added later in 1976. So what's the story there? What happened?
Oh, imagine the uproar. India, under a state of emergency in 1976 with Indira Gandhi as prime minister, suddenly amends the preamble. People were, understandably, skeptical. Adding socialist at that time, well, let's just say it raised quite a few eyebrows.
So what was the thinking behind adding that term? Why then?
Well, on the surface, it aimed to emphasize India's commitment to reducing economic inequality. So think, social welfare programs, equitable distribution of wealth, things like that.
But was this really a change in direction for India, or was it more like acknowledging what was already happening? Kind of like putting a label on something that was already in the fridge. Did the label actually change the taste of what was inside?
That's a great way to put it. Some argue that India had been implementing socialist-inspired policies since independence, so it was more of a formal acknowledgement of an existing direction. But others saw it as an attempt to maybe solidify Indira Gandhi's control and even limit certain individual freedoms.
So the label might have caused more controversy than the contents of the jar, so to speak. Okay, let's move on to secular. Now, that one feels particularly relevant, even more so today. What's the significance of this term in the Indian context?
Oh, it's huge, especially when you consider India's, its neighborhood. Many countries in that region have official state religions. So India's commitment to secularism is really, truly unique.
So no favoritism or special treatment for any one religion. Everyone's free to practice their own faith or even choose not to follow any religion at all. That's what it means.
Exactly. It means that the state doesn't endorse or promote any particular religion, and that all citizens are completely free to practice their faith without discrimination or fear.
Makes sense. So we've covered sovereign, socialist, and secular. Let's move on to democratic, which Well, almost seems self-explanatory, doesn't it? I mean, we all know what a democracy is, right?
Well, you'd think so, right? But democratic in the Indian context goes beyond just, having elections and voting rights. It also encompasses social and economic democracy, striving for equality in all spheres of life.
So it's not just about political rights, but also about ensuring that everyone has a fair shot at a good life, regardless of their background.
Precisely. It's about creating a society where everyone has equal opportunities and access to resources, regardless of, well, their caste, creed, or economic status.
All right, last but not least, we have republic. What's the significance of that word in the grand scheme of things?
Well, think about it. After centuries of monarchy and colonial rule, India declares itself a republic. That means the head of state is an elected representative, not a king or queen who, just inherited the position. Power rests with the people, not with a royal family.
That must have been a powerful message to send both to the world and to the Indian people themselves, breaking free from the shackles of the past and embracing a new era of self-governance.
You got it. Declaring India a republic was basically saying, we are a nation of equals. Our leader will be chosen by the people, for the people.
Okay, so we've covered we the people and those 5 defining characteristics of the Indian state. But there's more to this preamble, right? It's not over.
Oh, absolutely not. It goes on to lay out some key objectives: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And these aren't just, nice-sounding words, oh no. They have real implications for how India actually functions as a nation. We'll dive into those in just a bit. But first, I noticed something interesting. The preamble mentions 2 dates: the date the Constitution was adopted and the date it came into effect. November 26, 1949, and January 26, 1950. Why the distinction? Seems like a minor detail, but I'm sure there's a reason.
Good question. Why 2 dates? It can't just be for the drama, can it?
It's not just about the drama, though there might be a bit of that too. Remember, we talked about historical context. January 26 holds a very, very special place in India's history, because it was on that date in 1930 that the Indian National Congress declared Purna Swaraj, complete independence from British rule.
So by choosing January 26th for the Constitution to come into effect, they were making a symbolic connection to the independence movement. Kind of like, this is the day we truly become a free and self-governing nation.
Exactly. It was a powerful way to honor that historic moment and to link the Constitution to the struggle for independence. It shows that the Constitution wasn't just, a legal document. It was the culmination of a long and hard-fought battle for freedom.
Wow. I'm seeing how every word, every phrase, every date in this preamble is like loaded with meaning and significance. It's like a historical tapestry woven together with threads of struggle, hope, and aspiration. Beautiful.
Beautifully put. And speaking of threads, there's another one we need to untangle. You see, the preamble has been at the center of a fascinating debate. Is it truly a part of the Constitution, or is it just a poetic preface?
Right.
That debate about the preamble, whether it's actually part of the Constitution, that's where things get really interesting. It all goes back to a case in 1960, the Buraburi Union case. That's when the Supreme Court initially said, get this, that the preamble wasn't technically a part of the Constitution, just a kind of preface.
Wait, what? How can the very first thing not be part of the document? It's like introducing. That's kind of absurd, isn't it?
It does seem counterintuitive, yeah. Back then, the court saw it more as a statement of intent. Helpful for understanding the big picture, but not something you could really rely on in actual legal arguments.
So you couldn't go to court and be like, hey, this law totally violates the principle of justice that's, outlined in the preamble.
Exactly. Well, at least that was the thinking back in 1960. But then, in 1973, we had the Kesavananda Bharati case. Things got a bit of a shakeup.
Oh, yeah, Kesavananda Bharati. Pretty sure that's considered one of the most important cases in Indian legal history.
It is, absolutely. Landmark case. And it's in Kesavananda Bharati that the Supreme Court totally reversed its stance on the preamble. They ruled that, yes, it is a part of the Constitution, an integral part.
So what happened? What made them change their minds after, more than a decade?
Well, during the Kesavananda Bharati case, the court really looked deep into the history of the preamble, how it was drafted, and they found that the preamble wasn't just tacked on at the end. It was debated and discussed and voted on just like every other part of the Constitution.
So it went through the ringer, basically. The framers really intended for it to be like a core part of the document, not just a pretty intro.
Exactly. The court realized that the Buraburi interpretation, the one from before, was mistaken. So they course-corrected, and that decision has had a huge impact on how we understand the Constitution.
Okay, so the preamble is in the club, officially. But we also talked about how it's not directly enforceable. You can't sue someone for, say, violating the principle of fraternity. So what's its power, really? Why is it so important if it can't win a lawsuit?
It's a great question. It gets at what makes the preamble so powerful. It acts as a guide for interpreting all the other parts of the Constitution, like a lens. You see all the specific laws and rights through it.
So it helps us understand the spirit of the Constitution, the intention behind the specific legal stuff. It's like having the author's notes to help you understand a really complex book.
That's the perfect analogy. And to really see how it works, think about the right to privacy. It's not actually mentioned in the Constitution.
Really? Wow. But that's a fundamental right, especially now, right?
Absolutely. And in the 2017 K.S. Puddaswamy case, the Supreme Court used the preamble's emphasis on the dignity of the individual to establish that right to privacy as a fundamental right, even though it wasn't specifically written in the Constitution itself.
So they basically connected the dots between a principle from the preamble and a specific right that wasn't spelled out. Wow. That's pretty incredible. The preamble is still shaping how we understand rights.
Exactly. It shows that it's not just symbolic, it's a living document. It guides legal thinking in India even today.
Okay, so the preamble has had quite the journey, legally speaking, and we haven't even mentioned the 42nd Amendment, the one that added socialist and secular and integrity. That must have been controversial considering when it happened.
Oh, absolutely. The 42nd Amendment happened during a pretty tumultuous time. There was political turmoil, a state of emergency. So yeah, it sparked a lot of debate. Some saw it as trying to strengthen certain principles, while others thought it was a way to grab more power.
Let's go one by one, starting with socialists. We touched on that a bit earlier. What new stuff did the 42nd Amendment bring to the table? Did actually adding it to the preamble lead to any, concrete changes in policy or law? Yeah, adding socialists during a state of emergency definitely sounds like it would cause some fireworks. Makes you wonder if it was about really making society more equal or just a way to grab more power and call it social justice.
It's tough to say, really. It probably was a little of both, if we're being honest. You see, India already leaned towards socialist policies, even before the amendment, since independence, really. Adding socialist was kind of like, officially recognizing what was already happening.
Like putting a label on it, like we were saying. The jar was already full, but now it had a name.
Exactly, but the timing, During an emergency, when people's freedoms were being limited, that made people doubt what the government was really up to. Was it about actual change or just a way to control the economy and people's lives under the name of socialism?
It's wild how one word can cause so much debate. And speaking of debate, adding secular at the same time, that must have ruffled some feathers too.
Oh, it did. On the surface, it was about, strengthening India's commitment to religious freedom, treating all faiths equally. But again, because of the whole emergency thing, people were suspicious.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like you're saying religious freedom for everyone. But at the same time, you're cracking down on anyone who disagrees with you. Sends a mixed message for sure.
Exactly. The 42nd Amendment, even though it was meant to make something stronger, ended up causing more confusion than anything. And we're still debating what it all really means, even today.
Okay, so we've got socialist, we've got secular. Both pretty loaded terms, lots of baggage there.
Yeah.
What about integrity? That seems less politically charged. Why add that one?
Well, remember, this was after the war with Pakistan in 1971, the one that led to the creation of Bangladesh. Adding integrity was a way to say, look, India is one united nation. We're indivisible.
Like, we might have our differences, but we're in this together. No one can tear us apart.
Exactly. It was a message of, strength and resilience, a call for unity at a time when there were threats from outside and divisions within, and a reminder that India's territory is important, something to be defended.
It's amazing how the preamble, just these few lines, can hold so much history, so much political tension.
It really shows how it's a living document, always changing. Reflecting where India is, the challenges, the hopes at different points in time, the 42nd Amendment, with all its ups and downs, is a perfect example of that.
We've talked about how the preamble is part of the Constitution's basic structure. Untouchable, basically. But we haven't really explained what that means, basic structure.
Good point. It's a super important idea in Indian law. It basically says that, yes, Parliament can change the Constitution, but not the core parts, the essential stuff.
So there are, non-negotiables.
Yeah.
The heart and soul of the Constitution. No changing those no matter what.
Yep, that's it. And the Supreme Court, in the case of an Undipurt Api case, made it clear that the preamble is part of that core. But here's the thing. They never actually listed everything that's part of the basic structure.
So it's kind of mysterious,
Right.
always changing, up for interpretation.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting. It means the Constitution can adapt, as times change. But it also has that solid foundation, so it can't be completely flipped on its head.
I'm seeing how the preamble, with its values and its place in that basic structure, is like a protector of Indian democracy. It makes sure those big ideas, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, those stick around, no matter what.
That's it. The preamble, short as it is, has a big impact on law and politics in India. It shows how forward-thinking those who wrote the Constitution were. They made something that could grow with the country while still holding on to those important values.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've gone through the history of the preamble, what it's made of, how it's changed, and how it protects the Constitution. We even talked about the debates people still have about it. It's complicated stuff.
And we've seen how this short paragraph is anything but simple. It shows how complex and strong Indian democracy is. It's about the country's journey, the struggles, the dreams. It's all there.
Before we finish up, I want to give our listeners something to think about. Go back and read the preamble. Take your time. Really let it sink in. What do those words mean to you in your own life, in India today? It's a personal thing,
Ask yourself, why is this document so powerful? What can we learn from its history? And most importantly, how do we keep those ideas, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, alive? Especially as we face all the challenges, all the possibilities of the 21st century.
Great questions. We'll leave you with those. And that's a wrap on our deep dive. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it got you thinking. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.